And you know, right now we'd like to start answering your questions, and you can keep sending them to the email address on your screen. As I mentioned, Chelsea Corcoran-Quad from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been reviewing the questions coming in. And to get started, we'll take a question from our studio audience. Do we have a question here?
Does it ever get too cold or too hot for bats to live?
Yeah, you know, actually, the poles are too cold. There's really probably nothing to eat as well. But it is too cold for them to live in the poles. And there's some really hot, dry deserts in Africa that we really see very little bat activity as well.
Thanks. Great question. Great answer. Now, Chelsea, do you have any questions coming in by email?
Sandy, they're rolling in even as we speak. I'm watching them, and they're coming from all across the country. And the first one I see is from Gulfstream Elementary all the way down in Miami, Florida. And their class was wondering what kind of impact on the environment will occur if bats do become extinct.
Oh, that's a great question. I think we can
do it
probably tag team it.
We can probably do that together.
Yeah.
Well, bats in general, that's huge. We could say bats in the United States, so why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, and actually because of white nose syndrome, it's possible that we could see some regional extinction of bats, particularly in the Northeast, where there's been a lot of mortality. Actually, our scientists have done some modeling and think that it is possible that the little brown bat could become extinct in the northeastern U.S. in the next 10 years. And that bat is really widespread, and they eat tons and tons of insects. So that could have a big impact on our agriculture and our forest products industry. And as this disease continues to spread and impact more bat species in the Midwest and Southeast, and as we move west in the U.S., it's possible that we could see more bats becoming extinct and see a greater impact on our agricultural and forest industry here in the U.S.
And worldwide, you know, bats are pollinators, they're seed dispersers, they're part of the food chain. So like I showed you Congo, he is a keystone species in Africa. So that bat is really important for spreading seeds across the entire continent of Africa. So there could be huge impacts if bats went extinct.
Thank you.
Okay,
Chelsea.
we've got another one, and this one's coming from us from Chicago, from third graders at Christ the King School. And they would like to know, why are bats not able to sense or warn each other that their cave or their habitat isn't safe from this white nose syndrome?
Wow, that's a really great question. Well, bats actually do communicate really well with each other. They use all different kinds of sounds and noises to communicate with each other. And we haven't seen bats communicating specifically about the disease that we know of, although bats are moving around and moving to different caves when the disease gets there. So we do wonder if the bats are somehow aware that this cave is not becoming safe, and they may be moving to different sites within that cave or different caves to try to get away from the disease. So we'll learn more about that as we discover more about this disease.
Great.
Thank you, Chelsea. And let's go to our studio audience. And let's...
Well, I've got a lot
Chelsea.
more.
You've got a bunch.
This
Thank
one
you.
is from Mrs. Wentz class in Grand Blanc, Michigan. Since bats' wings are made out of this thin membrane skin, does it ever tear and make it hard for those bats to fly?
It can tear, and most likely it's going to tear either probably from a couple of different reasons. Either predators will try to grab them, or if they do get a hold of them, their wings will often tear. Or it could even be what they land on. So sometimes it could be barbed wire or something like that they could end up tearing it. And the bat's wing is very thin. If you want to know how a bat's wing feels, just close your eyelid and touch the skin that covers your eye. That is really how a bat's wing feels. But if they get a tear, they're probably then food for predators. If they get a little hole, I've seen bats flying around with holes. They can still fly, and that'll heal over pretty quickly.
Great. This one here is from Mr. Olson's fourth graders all the way up in Washington State, and they would like to know, if a bat is kept as a pet or in captivity, is it possible it will live longer than in the wild?
You know, we found most longevity records actually in the wild. We've found a few in captivity, but I think caring for bats in captivity is really far more complex than we might know. And so we see sometimes the same amount, sometimes less, sometimes more. So it's kind of all over the board.
Just depends.
Great. And Chelsea, we're going to go to the studio audience. So
Great.
Do you have a question?
Why are bats always upside down?
Good question.
You want me to answer
No,
that?
yeah, go.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I think, it could be fun, but I think primarily is that they, their hips are so thin, their bone mass in their pelvic girdle, our pelvis that holds us up, is so thin, only about a third of the size of what it should be to hold up their large upper body. So you can see the bats have a large upper body to be able to fly, but their bone mass and their hips are very thin, and that was probably an adaptation for flight.
Thank you. Thank you. Chelsea, can we go to you for a question?
Absolutely. Jesus Collins in Fort Wayne, Indiana wants to know if bats have venom or poison.
Do bats have venom or poison? None that we know of, thank goodness. As a bat researcher, I don't want to be that one to find out, I guess.
And I've got another one here. Cassie Scoble at McKinney School in Hillsboro, Oregon wants to know if a small bat has really big ears, how it flies and keeps its balance.
A bat with really big ears. You know what's really interesting, on some of those big-eared bats, they're actually able to fold them back. So they even go into like little tiny crevices to hide. So some of these big-eared bats live in very small rock crevices, and they'll be able to fold them back. And there's just really, again, they're soft skin. But they can also keep them up. So they're flying sometimes 15, 20, 30 miles per hour, still needing those big ears, those big satellite dishes, bringing in those sounds so they don't run into anything. I think it is actually a pretty interesting adaptation, an interesting part of their body, and I really like that question, but I bet you there's not much research known, so like Anne said, become a bat scientist, and you figure it out.
There you go.
I mean, that's one of the cool things that we all love about bats, is that we don't know a lot about bats, so this has really helped us over the years stay really motivated, because we have the same kinds of really cool questions.
Oh, that's great. Let's go to the studio audience.
When are bats most aggressive?
Oh, wow.
Me again?
Well, I mean,
Bats are most aggressive probably when you grab one.
Yeah.
I would assume. No, when predators are going after them, bats really are not aggressive. They're really calm, easygoing animals. They would much rather fly, the fight or flee. They're not a fighting animal. They don't have poisons. They don't have big stingers. They don't have giant teeth or something like that. So in general, they're going to try to get away. So they're really not aggressive. But obviously, if they're attacked by a predator, it could be us. You find one on the ground, it's going to bite to protect itself. I would never be concerned about a bat like flying down and landing on you or something like that.
Thanks. Chelsea, can we go to the emails?
Yes, I actually have one for Anne, and this is from Mrs. Durgan's class at Meadowmack Middle School, all the way up in Waldoboro, Maine. And they want to know if there is a cure for this devastating white-nose fungus.
that's a really great question. Currently, we don't have a cure for white nose syndrome. We are working on trying to find ways that we might be able to either control the fungus in the environment or that we might be able to treat wild bat populations. But there's not anything out there that exists right now. So this is going to have to be something new that our scientists come up with. But fortunately, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service and U.S. Geological Survey and our nonprofit partners and all the other state and federal agencies, there are a lot of really great, smart scientists working on this disease. So I'm pretty hopeful that we'll figure something out, hopefully pretty soon.
I hope so too.
The other good thing that Anne was saying as well, I mean, there's some positive sides. One thing is that it is only affecting bats that are hibernating. And right now we're hoping that this fungus really doesn't morph into something that affects tropical bats as well. So hopefully the bats that I said earlier that are solitary, that are migrating species will not be affected by this fungus. And hopefully none of these tropical bats, where most bats are from the tropics, hopefully none of these tropical bats will be ever affected as well.
Great. And Chelsea,
Great.
another email question?
I sure do. This is from Rebecca Conger's class at Indian Creek Elementary in Indianapolis, Indiana. And they want to know, when the bats are flying and they catch those bugs with their wings, do they stop to eat them, and how do they go about eating them?
Some bats do stop to eat them, so not usually like the ones that they can grab, but sometimes they do. especially the big ones. So there are bats that are called gleaners, and they'll come down and land on the ground or glean or take something off of the ground. That's usually something pretty big, and they'll take it off like a big grasshopper or something like that. They'll take it off somewhere, and they'll go up into a tree and they'll eat it there. There are other bats that eat things like scorpions, and they'll do the same thing. But most bats are aerial feeders, so they're eating on the fly. And so they're consuming, and they need to consume a lot of insects, partly just because they're flying, but they consume them in flight. So like I said before, they'll use their wing, and they'll just kind of scoop and eat and just keep flying.
Awesome.
It's really cool to watch.
Angus is doing a really good job of showing us his hand wings right now.
Right.
You can see can you see all of his fingers in there? Maybe you can stretch one out. I just know.
Yeah, so yeah,
Oh, maybe not.
No.
doesn't really like it.
No.
He just was doing it spontaneously for a minute.
Great. Well, let's go to a question from from Saunders and go ahead.
What's like? How much does a bat? Like, how much insects does a bat normally eat in a day?
And really, how much do bats eat? And they eat a wide variety, so there could be as much as about half of their body weight in insects, where fruit bats could be eating 2.5 times their body weight in fruit. So we've got a big variety of, I guess, amounts of their food. Some mom bats, so they're nursing or they're raising their babies, need a lot more nutrients, so they could be eating their entire body weight. And the number of insects would be different depending on the types of insects that they're eating. But in general, we say most bats will eat about 2,000 to 5,000 insects a night. But fruit bats, like I said, could eat 2.5 times their body weight. So if you weigh 100 pounds, you have to eat 250 pounds worth of food to eat as much as a fruit bat does in fruit every day.
A lot of fruit.
Wow. And Chelsea, from the email.
Noah Collins, he's a student in Irving, Texas, would like to know what materials he might be able to use to construct his own bat house in his backyard.
You know what? I've worked with a lot of scouts and groups too that actually use donated. What do you call those things? You put
Pallets.
something pallets. Yeah, the thing and the stuff. Okay, pallets, donated pallets, or work with also local lumber yards or even deck builders because they've got scraps. You could get your supplies for free. Then you could also work with a local Lions Club or something like that that could even cut it for you, or a high school shop class too that could cut it. So I think there's actually easy free ways to be able to build bat houses, really durable ones that we could get out into parks and places like that. So that's a really good question. And also on our website, and there's a lot of other websites that have good information about the right design, the right placement, and even videos on how to build your own as well.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's go to a question from Saunders.
Do bats have like a specific favorite food, like the one that looked like the Chihuahua? What was his favorite food? Does he have one?
You know, the fruit bats usually prefer really juicy, yummy stuff, so that's what we put in here. But there are a lot of bright lights, so sometimes they won't eat. But usually it's melons, which are really green melon, orange melon, not as much watermelon, which I'm kind of surprised about. But also they love bananas. They just absolutely love bananas. So bananas and melon are probably their favorite.
Well, and one other really interesting thing with the insectivorous bats, we have lots of diversity in insectivorous bats, and some bats like specific insects versus others. So Radar, the little brown or the big brown bat we had out earlier, those really like beetles. They have really sharp teeth to crunch through those hard exoskeletons. But then some of the big-eared bats, they have really big ears. They really like moths. They like those soft-bodied things. So a lot of different bats, insectivorous bats, like different kinds of insects too.
That's great. That's great. And you know, folks, thank you all for your great questions. But gosh, that's all the time we have for today.